So we've just got a little bit of time now for questions. So if you've thought of anything, please raise your hand. Just before we kick off, actually, a gentleman emailed me beforehand, so I've got his question here. So thank you to David. You don't have to show yourself if you don't want to, but thank you for your question. And his question was basically around this idea that because of, you know, the laws of relativity, the speed of light, these sorts of things, the actual chance of us ever meeting a civilization face to face, if we do establish contact, is so unlikely that we'd have to send somebody off and maybe put them into suspended animation or use any of these kind of technologies. So I just wondered if you'd talk a little bit more about, once we've made contact, how would we ever meet these people, these beings, these other civilizations,
Sure.
or would that just, because of the distances, is it unimaginable?
I mean, I'm a huge science fiction fan, and I fervently wish that something like warp drive could be feasible. But it probably isn't. So from that aspect, the gentleman asking the question is correct. It's going to be very difficult for biological life forms to travel across interstellar distances and, you say, meet each other face to face. Not necessarily impossible for robotic probes. The two Voyager spacecraft, which were launched in 1977, they've just passed the heliopause. They've left the heliosphere, which is the sun's magnetic area of influence, and they're out in interstellar space. Now, they're going to go offline in a few years, but perhaps an advanced civilization could build probes that could last for centuries or millennia. Maybe the probes could build replicas of themselves and spread out in a colonizing wave. It's been suggested that you may have heard of something called the technological singularity, which is this idea that in the future we'll be able to merge with computers and basically become machines ourselves. And if that is the case, then maybe we could load ourselves up onto these probes and go out into space. But yeah, I think, the concerns about being invaded by aliens or whatever probably isn't accurate because of the interstellar distances involved. It just makes travel for biological life, at least, really, really difficult.
Thanks very much. So this gentleman at the front was, I think, first with his hand up, and then we'll go here, and then we'll pick some other questions. And do remember, there's no such thing as a stupid question here. The only stupid question is the one that you don't ask. So please carry on.
Yeah. Isn't the central problem about contact with extraterrestrial intelligence is that we've been capable of sending out radio signals for about 100 years. So the likelihood is, if we come across any civilization that is able to pick them up, or indeed transmit them, they're going to be a lot more advanced than we are, because they're not going to have developed that ability exactly parallel to ours. And looking at our own history, the history of contact between technologically advanced societies and technologically primitive societies has not been a happy one. And a lot of our efforts as humans is directed towards advancing ourselves, to developing new medicines, new technologies, and so forth. But if you have a society that we're in contact with that knows all those answers, all our efforts become pointless. I mean, if your society is based around chipping out stone arrowheads and going hunting wild pigs or something, and suddenly you find a society where you can just ask them, they'll give you a tin of spam or something, then your whole society collapses because its whole raison d'etre has vanished, and we would just become a sort of beggar society. All that effort would be pointless.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. That if I think that was kind of the wish, certainly in the early days of SETI, that we would detect some kind of an Encyclopedia Galactica which would contain, all the secrets of the universe and tell us how to cure cancer and diseases and prevent global warming and things like that. Again, a message like that, I think, would depend on a degree of altruism from the other civilization. Would they want to give us all that information? If they give us advanced technology, how do they know that we're not going to turn around and use it against them or something like that? So that could prevent them. But you're right. If they give us all the information, tell us, all the secrets of the universe, what more is there for us to do? And yeah, that's a valid concern. I don't have any disagreement with that. I think there's going to be a language barrier problem when we meet alien life. and a cultural problem because we would share no cultural history. Whether we could, even if we could decipher their language, whether we would understand their cultural idioms is a question. So I think there's still a lot of ifs and buts and maybes. But I don't think doing SETI to try and get, medical cures and things is a valid reason for doing SETI. But maybe they could. I don't know. But it's certainly a possibility, and it has been raised by other SETI scientists in the past. But yeah. But we have to make contact at some point. So at some point we're going to have, if we can have a conversation, there's going to be that transfer of information at some point. But yeah. I think there's still, so you're talking about science, and there's still artistic efforts that we do. Maybe aliens would be interested in our art, not our science, and we could could trade our art for their scientific knowledge. I'm just throwing ideas out here. Nobody really knows, but it is kind of fun to guess and speculate. But yeah, in principle, I agree.
There's a question here.
So, hello. My question is, can it be that some alien civilizations have developed their technologies over millions of years to such an extent that they've actually shrunk themselves down to microbial size, and they're sort of floating around, on Earth, basically right in front of our eyes? And do you think that's possible? And have you touched on that in your book?
It's not mentioned in my book, but I have heard it discussed. So I don't think biologically we could shrink ourselves down to the scale of microbes. There are, the laws of physics wouldn't let that happen. But I guess, I mentioned the technological singularity and the idea that we could upload our brains into machines. And then obviously we have nanotechnology, which are basically nano-sized machines. So I guess in principle, I'm not saying it's possible, but I guess there's a degree of feasibility about that idea, yeah.
Yes, I think I have a sort of a dim picture of how a radio telescope detects incoming radio signals, but how does a radio telescope send outgoing signals, and what's the limit on the power of a signal that can be sent?
Well, most radio telescopes can't send signals. Most can only listen. But Arecibo is different in that it has a transmitter, just like a transmitter, that transmits out our television signals, which is a lot more powerful. And you can also use radar. Obviously, that's sending out radio waves. So that's all. That's really all it is. Just think of it as a trumped-up TV aerial, really, just a much bigger transmitter. In terms of power, I'm not sure. I couldn't give you a specific figure for Arecibo without looking it up. But as I mentioned, one Arecibo could detect another Arecibo at most at about a distance of 400 light years, and Arecibo couldn't detect our television broadcasts from Alpha Centauri, so that gives you some indication.
Keith, you talk quite a bit about Proxima Centauri, which I think is recognised as being a potentially habitable planet. I'm very interested to know, what is your view of the TRAPPIST-1 system, where you have like 7 Earth planets, at least one of them within the habitable zone? Do you think that could be a possible home for an extraterrestrial civilization?
Yeah, so for anybody who doesn't know, TRAPPIST-1 is a planetary system that was discovered a few years ago, and as the gentleman says, there's 7 planets orbiting this star. It's pretty much the most planets we found around one star so far, other than the planets around the sun. The problem with TRAPPIST-1 is it's what's called a red dwarf. These are the most common type of stars in the universe, but they're the smallest and the coolest. Now you think they're small and cool, they can't be dangerous stars. Well, actually, they're really magnetically active, and they unleash flares of radiation. And because they're cool, the planets have to be closer into the star to be warm enough to be in the habitable zone. But by being so close, they're in the firing line of all this radiation. So there's a big question mark over whether planets around red dwarfs could be habitable anyway, or whether they've been irradiated and their atmospheres blown away. And we don't know yet until we have the ability to probe those atmospheres, which hopefully soon we will.
When you're looking at planetary life, do you take into account the levels of entropy, and is that possible to do?
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, if you've got a planet which has very high levels of entropy, it's unlikely that they'd be able to, according to the second law of thermodynamics, be able to have many reactions going on, whereas this low entropy,
Right.
it'd be more likely to contain life, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know about high entropy. Certainly on Titan, which is a moon of Saturn, there's been some speculation that there could be life there. Now Titan is the moon that has the methane lakes, and it's very, very, very cold, about minus 179 degrees at the surface. And it's been speculated because there's this kind of organic soup on Titan, all these hydrocarbons, which are basically essential building blocks for life. And it's been speculated that maybe Titan could have life. But the argument against that is that it's so cold there that those reactions you talked about would progress so slowly that life would be impossible. So I guess there's that. In terms of higher entropy, I'm afraid I'll have to defer to somebody who knows a little bit more about that.
Hi. Thought the talk was great. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Aside from funding, what's the biggest hindrance that SETI faced to finding an extraterrestrial life, do you think?
I'm going to say impatience. Because it's a big universe out there and a lot of stars to search through. And, you know, you've probably heard people saying, well, we've been doing SETI for 60 years and we haven't found anything. It's a waste of time. There's nobody out there. And as I explained, you know, we've barely sampled the galaxy, so we can't possibly come to that conclusion. But I think if people do start to get impatient, then funding that you mentioned could start to dry up again if people think it's a waste of time because we've searched for long enough. It's a project that's going to last a long time. Hopefully not. Hopefully we'll find something tomorrow, but the likelihood is it could take a long time. So we have to start thinking in the long term. But, you know, I think as a society we need to start thinking more long term anyway to deal with the problems that society currently faces. So maybe there's a lesson in SETI for us in that regard.
Keith, thank you very much. Could you comment on Oumuamua, the thing that came through our solar system?
Sure.
And then your talk seems to also touch on the Fermi paradox, which you didn't mention by name, but the notion of a very large universe with long expanses of time, and yet we haven't found anything yet. There are a number of great filters that people have proposed as solutions to that. Maybe you could touch on that too.
Okay, sure. So I'll deal with the first part first, which is Oumuamua. For anybody who doesn't know, in 2017, astronomers discovered this object. They thought it was a comet at first. Then they looked at its trajectory and found this hasn't come from the solar system. This has come from out there. This has come from interstellar space. It was the first ever interstellar object found passing through our solar system. And, you know, everybody got excited about it. But it was very strange. It had a very strange shape. It was very elongated, quite unlike anything in our solar system, they thought. That's been revised a little bit, and it's not very elongated, it's just a bit elongated. And we have found a couple of objects in the solar system that are oddly shaped. But it was suggested maybe it's an alien spacecraft just flying through it, a bit like the Arthur C. Clarke novel Rendezvous with Rama. And a professor at Harvard, Avi Loeb, suggested it was a spacecraft, in particular with a solar sail. And the reason he thought this is because it moved, it changed direction. Now, if you're coming through on a hyperbolic orbit, you should stick to that orbit. But it veered off from that just a little bit. Now, comets do that because they have outgassing, and the outgassing pushes them, moves them off that trajectory. But there was no evidence of outgassing from Oumuamua. Now, most cometary scientists figured, well, there must have been. It must have been just at such a low level that we couldn't detect it. But Avi Loeb at Harvard did suggest that maybe it was a spacecraft with a solar sail, and it was the solar sail that was pushing it off the hyperbolic trajectory. I would say every scientist who researches comets would disagree with that. It was tumbling, and if it was a solar sail, then if it was tumbling, it'd be all over the place. They're fairly confident it was a kind of quasi-comet asteroid object. And we found another interstellar object since, Comet Borisov, and there are expected to be thousands of these things coming through the solar system at any time. So that's Oumuamua. So you mentioned the Fermi paradox. So again, the Fermi paradox is the question, if we expect them to be out there, aliens to be out there, why don't we see any evidence of them? And this was a paradox. I don't like calling it a paradox for reasons I'll get onto in a minute. So in 1951, a physicist called Enrico Fermi, he worked on the Manhattan Project, and he worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in the United States. And over lunch, one day. He was looking through a copy of The New Yorker, which is a satirical magazine in the United States, and there was a cartoon depicting aliens stealing trash cans because there'd been a spate of flying saucer sightings in New York and a spate of mysterious trash can disappearances. So the cartoonist had the aliens abducting the trash cans. So anyway, Fermi is looking at this, and he puts it down and thinks, why aren't they here? So he disregarded the flying saucer sightings. He said, if there are advanced aliens out there, why don't we see evidence of them? Why haven't they colonized the galaxy and colonized Earth? There's been enough time in the history of the universe for them to do this. And after the fact, this became called the Fermi paradox, and it's been broadened to encompass things like why don't we detect radio signals and things like that. I don't think it's a paradox. It is a paradox, but it's a paradox of assumptions. We're making assumptions. It's not a paradox of information or fact, because for the reasons I mentioned, we haven't searched far and wide enough to say that they're not out there or anything like that. And in terms of interstellar flight, we've covered that interstellar flight is feasible. And Fermi didn't think it was, and that was his solution to it, that just interstellar flight wasn't possible.
Hi, thank you. Something you touched upon is something that absolutely torments my brain. So basically, we're looking for life in the way that we know it. So we're looking in the habitable zone. And I understand the practicality of that because, it gives us a place to start from. But it strikes me as a little bit arrogant to think that life will only ever, or will, it is the most likely way for it to form. So I'd like to know that, although the practicality is obviously searched that way, is there anyone else looking for ways life could be otherwise, so not in those habitable zones? And if so, where are they starting? What kind of framework would you use to do that?
Yeah, sure. So the habitable zone is, some planetary scientists really hate the notion of the habitable zone. Because it's dependent on so many things. It needs to be an Earth-like planet. Mars and Venus are kind of at the inner and outer edges of the habitable zone, and neither of them are remote. Well, maybe Mars possibly is. So I mentioned Jupiter's moon Europa, Saturn's moon Enceladus, and Titan as well. So these are way outside of the normal habitable zone. But they have oceans underneath. They're kept warm by gravitational tidal forces from the giant planets that they orbit. So they are really where astrobiologists are focusing their attention. And yeah, it's you could have a planet beyond what we consider to be the habitable zone, but the atmosphere could be so thick that it could stay warm enough anyway for life.
Could there be life that doesn't need water, that doesn't need warmth? And if so, where would we start to look for that? Or is anyone even thinking about that? Or is it too far beyond what we can think ourselves to even do that?
I think astrobiologists are thinking of that. So they study, you may have heard of extremophiles, which are microbial life that can live in, or thrive even, in extreme conditions that normal life would just die instantly in. So you have, extremophiles that can survive in extreme radiation, or in extreme temperature, or that can exist in really dry conditions. But even they need some water. As far as we know, all life needs water. Now, could there be alien life so alien that it doesn't need water? An astrobiologist would probably say no, certainly for sort of carbon-based life that we understand. But, the very definition of alien is not like us, so I would say most life probably does need water. Although on Titan, methane takes the place of water. So the lakes are liquid methane and liquid ethane and hydrocarbons. And actually, Chris McGhee at NASA Ames, he has developed a model where life could survive on methane without the water. It's fairly speculative. So I guess people are kind of thinking of that. Yeah.
Well, can we just solve this with a show of hands? Who thinks you can have life without water? Anyone? Oh, few. Who thinks no, you do need to have water to have life? Oh, it's about 50-50. Oh well. There's a question just behind you, but we'll take the question there first.
You've spoken about intelligent life in the universe, but what do you think about the hypothetical issue that by looking for life, we could be interfering with the evolution of less advanced organisms or civilizations?
Yeah, sure. So Elon Musk talks about colonizing Mars. Now, if we found microbial life on Mars, for instance, I think colonizing Mars would be a really bad idea because I think we should leave that life alone, even if it's microbial. You're talking a bit about the prime directive from Star Trek, let's not interfere with civilizations. Because the universe is so old, the likelihood is that most civilizations are going to be more advanced than we are. But I guess it's feasible that there could be, planets with life, maybe, equivalent to our Neanderthals or humanity's ancient ancestors. Would it be morally right or ethically right to interfere with that life? I don't think it would be, but it depends what you call interference. If an asteroid is about to hit that planet and wipe all life out, could we interfere and prevent that if we're an advanced society? I think that would be morally and ethically right. But in terms of messing around with their culture or their society, I mean, I've watched too much Star Trek, so I believe in the prime directive, so I would say no.
Thanks for a really good talk and congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I have one theory for the Fermi paradox, and I'd like to know what you think of it.
Okay.
Considering that we only can experience 5% of the universe, perhaps the 95% is teeming with life and civilizations and alliances, and maybe we're the anomaly, like a rogue star or something. Maybe we're just not where we're supposed to be, and dark matter is where all the matter actually is.
Right, yeah. So you, with 5%, you're referring to the baryonic matter, the matter that's made up of neutrons and protons, the stuff that we can see, all the galaxies and gas and dust in the universe. But there's a huge amount of matter in the universe missing, dark matter. And we know it's there because we can see its gravitational effect. The problem is we have no idea what dark matter is. We don't know what it's made of or what it can do. We know that it interacts weakly with other matter. Could dark matter support life? That's quite speculative, considering we don't know what dark matter is. So there are science fiction stories that posit that hypothesis and have dark matter life. I'm gonna sit on the fence and say I don't know because we don't know what dark matter is, and until we do, I'm not sure there's much we can say about that. But you're right. There's huge chunks of the universe that we cannot see. We don't know what it is. We look at galaxies and baryonic matter, the stuff that makes up us, but that's just a small percentage of the matter in the universe. So yeah.
You said that if there was microbial life on Mars, you would be disinclined to go there and interfere with it. I was wondering, what if we're the microbes?
So, yes. So are you talking about sort of life on Mars and Earth being shared through meteorites? Or?
No. I mean, if there are life forms out there and they look down at Earth and think, they're cute, let's not interfere with them.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess that is, a risk of contact. Although if they're that advanced, I'm not sure there'd be anything we'd be able to do anyway. But you have to wonder, if a civilization really is 1 billion years older than us, 1 billion years, what would they be like? What could they accomplish? Would they, Arthur C. Clarke said that famous quote about advanced technology being like magic. Who do we think? They're gods? Again, this is a scenario that has been in Star Trek and science fiction like that before. I mean, let's face it, if there really was a technologically advanced, and when I talk about an advanced civilization, I'm not talking about them being advanced culturally or socially or anything like that. I'm just talking about their technology. We'd really be dependent on them being nice to us. There'd be nothing we could do, really.
Early on, you talked about establishing contact, I guess, through sending signals to each other before meeting them. But it seems to be a bit of it doesn't really seem to describe the situation if it's, let's say, 100 light years away. Are you really establishing a dialogue if it takes 100 years, or is it just kind of sending them a record of our society slowly?
Yeah. No, you're right, and that's one of the reasons why aliens might not want to go to the effort of sending out messages, because they're going to have to wait so long for a reply. From our point of view, I think if we receive a signal from 100 light years away or 1,000 light years away, it kind of doesn't matter if we reply or not, because we would know that we're not alone. That would be the most important information from that signal. When we are, we're finding planets around stars that are 10 light years away, 20 light years away, and if there was life on there, then it would be feasible to have a protracted conversation. It would take decades, but we could do it in our lifetime. Certainly for beyond there, then it does become more difficult to have a conversation, as you say. So maybe they would just dump all the information they have and send it in one burst, possibly. And that's the Encyclopedia Galactica that I alluded to earlier. But you're right, distance is a factor against SETI, yes.
Hello, thanks very much.
Hi.
I wonder whether you have seen the film called The Arrival.
I haven't yet, so don't spoil it for me.
Yeah, okay. I was going to ask whether you think the first real contact might be similar to that described in the movie.
Right. So
it's a question for the next, maybe lecture.
Yeah. So what I know of the film is that aliens come to Earth, and then the main character is a linguist who has to go and speak to them.
There's a big communication problem.
Yeah. So that was really, that's, even though I've not seen it, it is on my watch list. But that's really good because if you watch Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever, all the aliens speak English. Or we have some magical translator that can translate any language that, even if we've never encountered it before. In reality, if we did receive a message from aliens, unless they knew of us beforehand and had detected our radio leakage and had understood our language, we wouldn't understand what they're saying. It'd be a completely foreign language, and it would be extremely difficult to decipher without some kind of Rosetta Stone. So, yeah, I think a language barrier would be a really big obstacle to understanding. And that's, if we made contact and had some kind of dialogue, that language barrier could lead to misunderstandings, which could lead to detrimental effects in contact as well. So, yeah, that's something that people don't really talk about. If you want to learn more about extraterrestrial languages, there is actually a book called Extraterrestrial Languages. It's just come out, published by a writer called Daniel Oberhaus, and he talks about there's an artificial language called Linkos that was developed by a mathematician in 1960. Again, that year, everything happened in that year, didn't it? Hans Freudenthal, and this is meant to be a language that even aliens could understand, and it starts off with basic principles and builds up and builds up. But yeah, without some kind of Rosetta Stone, something that we could both come together on and commonly understand, then I think it's going to be difficult. Yeah.
Thanks. The ladies kind of stole my question. I was going to ask what you thought the most realistic depiction of kind of contact that you've seen, in your opinion. And you should definitely see Arrival, because it's a great film.
See, Contact, the movie and the novel by Carl Sagan that's based around SETI and about detecting a message. And they give us technology which allows Jodie Foster's character to go and meet them. And they're kindly aliens. But most realistic, I don't know. There's some pretty wild ideas in science fiction literature. That's written by authors with good scientific backgrounds. Rendezvous with Rama. Yeah. So that's Arthur C. Clarke about spacecraft from somewhere unknown passing through the solar system. It's not heading here, it's going somewhere else, and we just happen to hop aboard and discover this amazing kind of spacecraft. And I think in the later books, they actually, some of the astronauts actually go with the
Arabian species that communicates in colour.
Right. Yeah. And that's an interesting point, because we're assuming that aliens are going to speak a language and that they're going to be able to see things. Well, what if they're like bats and they use echolocation? Us sending an audio message isn't going to be much good. So again, that's another assumption about how we expect aliens to communicate. And they may not. They may use other means.
Hi. So I wanted to ask, basically, from everything you've said, it seems that you're more leaning towards the strong anthropic principle, which is that the universe lends itself to the creation of life. Uh-huh. But what if we're operating under the scenario that there's a weak anthropic principle, which is that the conditions for life are extremely rare? So, for example, in the case of Earth, mm-hmm. we have an unusually large moon, which is because another planet smashed into us, uh-huh. and it gave us a surplus of iron in our core, which makes our magnetic field unusually strong for even a planet within the habitable zone, which protects our life. So what if we're operating under a weak anthropic principle in the universe?
Yeah, so what you talk about there is also like the rare Earth scenario, that we're just kind of lucky that Earth is just right for life, so we're bound, this is the only place that life could evolve, and it did evolve here. And the other planets, they have whatever factors means that life can't evolve there. I don't agree with that principle. I think, that famous quote from Jeff Goldblum, life will find a way. If you look at Earth, we think it's special. You raised the example of a moon, and that we need a large moon to keep Earth's tilt stable, and that without a large moon, Earth would wobble all over the place, and that would create climate chaos. But there are ways around that. They've done computer simulations that show if Earth was spinning retrograde fast, wouldn't need a moon to keep us stable. Other things like, the other rare Earth ideas, I think, there are ways, like, does a planet need plate tectonics to facilitate the carbon silicate cycle, to act as like a global thermostat to moderate temperatures over large expanses of time? I think, planetary scientists have looked at that and looked at ways around that. So I don't believe in the rare Earth scenario. I certainly believe in what you mentioned about the strong anthropic principle, that the universe seems suspiciously fine-tuned for life. And then that leads us into the many worlds sort of multiverse theory, which is, I guess, is beyond the scope of this lecture. But I think there's all kinds of possibilities. I'd hesitate to narrow things down too much and saying life or the universe can only be this way. I don't think we know enough to be able to make that determination.
First of all, thanks for the talk. It was super interesting. Do you think that it might be possible that someone is sending signals, but we are just not able to get them? It's just like we send a radio signal to some spiders; they will never get them, right? So, do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the radio, for instance, we might miss their signals. So we're not searching enough to find maybe all the signals. But moving away from radio, there's been some speculation that maybe aliens would use neutrinos as a way of sending messages. I don't think neutrinos are a particularly good way to do that, because neutrinos hardly ever interact with matter. You could have a bar of lead half a light year long, and most of the neutrinos would go straight through it. But it has been speculated that maybe aliens would want to use neutrinos for some reason, or gravitational waves, things that we're not really considering looking for messages in. Or maybe they're using some kind of technology that we don't know. Maybe they're using hyperspace or something like that, and we just wouldn't be able to detect that because we don't know hyperspace exists or have technology to detect it. There's even been suggestions that aliens were here long ago, and as the previous question about interfering with life, maybe they left some kind of code in our DNA. There's even been a suggestion that we should look for patterns in the cosmic microwave background. If our universe is some, kid's lab experiment, and then maybe they've left a message in the CMB for us to find. So there's all kinds of speculative ideas. We've barely scratched the surface of them. So yeah, in principle, I'd agree that it's feasible.
Most biological species don't last more than about 3 million years at most. So do you think we should be seeding the universe with information about life and how to create life, on the off chance that that would be our way of contacting people, an alien species would be by sending them information about how to make a human or how to make whatever, some form of Earth life?
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's two things there. Yes, you're right that species tend not to last forever. Look at the dinosaurs wiped out by an asteroid and a supervolcano. But I'd point out that we're the first biological species that has the ability to prevent an asteroid wiping us out. So we could use technology to prolong our existence. Yeah, and it's been speculated that perhaps one motivation for an alien civilization to send signals is if they're dying and they want to just tell the universe that they were here. I guess that's one motivation for doing it. It's a slightly depressing motivation. I guess so. I'd like to focus more on trying to survive. But yeah, absolutely. If we thought we were all doomed tomorrow, then yeah, let's get on those radio transmitters and, you know.
Well, on that absolutely cheery and delightful note, I'd like to start to draw things to a close. Just before we thank Keith for his wonderful answers to the question, just thanks to you all for your excellent questions. Again, apologies if you didn't get time, but luckily, Keith will be sticking around for a little bit later, and there'll be copies of his book available. I'm sure if you ask him nicely, he'll also sign them for you. You'll notice up here, where are we? Second one down. Lord Martin Rees said that it's a great book, and Lord Martin Rees will be here in a few months' time, so do check our calendar for early 2020, where you can see the legend of British astronomy, who'll be here talking about his new book. But in the meantime, it's been a fantastic talk. Thank you so much, Keith, and we look forward to reading your book. Thank you.